Hello everyone and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be learning more about pytest fixtures and a lot more advanced things that you can do with them. So let's get started. So we've seen so far that you can create fixtures for pytest by using the @decorator pytest.fixture. And this will go ahead and turn any function into a fixture that we can then call later on in our test file to use whatever it is that we want to set up. So for this specific fixture, I'm just printing out that we're setting up this fixture since this fixture is defaulted to the function level whenever we use it. And we'll see more about the different kinds of fixtures you can create here in a minute. But we have this set up in the conf_test.py. On the right, we also have a test folder that has a folder for test API and test classes as example test folders. And in each of these, we have different test files. So I just have test1 in the test API folder and test2 in the test classes folder. We can see in the test classes folder has two separate classes that have tests. And this test1 is just a file of functional tests. So we can go ahead and run pytest. I'm going to use -s to capture all the output, whether the test failed or passed, so we can get all those print statements, and the v flag for verbose, so we can see the stuff a little bit more clearly. So we'll go ahead and run this, and we can take a look at our output. We can see each line has the test that it ran with the file, and they all passed, which is great, since they're all just asserting true. This is not what you would do in an actual test, but this is just for demonstration purposes. But we can see our print statement for our fixture was not printed out anywhere. That's because we're not using this fixture. If we take this function name and go into one of our files like test1 and we just add it as a parameter here and run pytest again, we can see that when it ran this test of test A, this function right here, it did set up the fixture for us. And this is how fixtures are set up to work by default. We can change the scope of a fixture to change how it interacts with our tests. So here I've got an example of changing the scope of the fixture we have here. So instead of being it just .fixture, we can then add the parentheses and add a name parameter as scope equals. And we can either have function, class, module, package, or session. And these have different behaviors depending on which one you choose. So by default, the scope is function, so both this fixture and this fixture will work the exact same. If we have the scope of class and we use the fixture inside a class test, like in the test2 file here, if we add the fixture here to one of these tests, it will create the fixture before any of these tests run in this class, and it will only create it once. But if we use it in both this class and this class, it'll create the fixture twice, once for this class and then once for this class. Next, we have the module level fixture, and this one will set up the fixture per test file. Next, we have the package scope, and this will set up a fixture for each of the packages that we have for our testing suites. And then last, we have the scope of session, and this will create the fixture one time for the entire testing session. This is a really common one to use whenever you're doing something with a database to set up and then tear down the database. Another really cool thing we can do is, along with the scope of function, class, module, package, and session, we can add another parameter called Autouse, which will automatically set up these fixtures for these specific scopes without us having to call them. So this is actually a great way to demonstrate how each of these fixtures work. So we'll first see how the fixtures are all set up for each function. In both the test2 file, there are no fixtures being used, and test1 has no fixtures being used. So we'll go ahead and pull up the console, and we'll run pytest-sv. And if we take a look at this, at each test, it's setting up the fixture. Test, fixture, test, fixture, test, fixture. If we then come back here and change this Autouse over to the class level, and we run this again, take a look at this output, we can see this class fixture is actually being set up for each test in the file. Since there are no classes associated to these tests, it's treating them as a function fixture. But whenever we do move on to an actual test class, like test cool things in the test2.py right here, in both of these, we can see that it's only setting up this fixture one time for each of the tests in this class. So here it's setting up again for each of these tests in this class. If we then come back and change this to module, go clear the console and run it again, we can see this fixture was only set up one time for each Python file. Then we'll change this Autouse over to package, and we'll pull this up again. And we can see this only set up one time, since we only have one package technically in this test suite. And it determines a package by if there is an underscore underscore init underscore underscore .py. I have not been able to get the scope package to work setting up more than one time, but it's not very a common thing to do, so I don't think it really matters. Then we'll change this again to session. Clear the console and run pytest again. And we can see it set up the fixture one time for the entire session. So the way we've created fixtures now is we just create the fixture and return a value, and that's it. But there might be some situations where you want to set up a fixture, or after you're finished with whatever your scope is, like a session or a specific function or a class, you want to also do some kind of tearing down of your fixture. A perfect example of this is using a database. You might want to set up a database and its tables, go ahead and run the test, and then drop all the tables or whatever else you want to do to the database. And we can do this by using the yield keyword. So let's take a look at an example. Here's an example of us doing some kind of setting up for our database. We're yielding the connection to the database, and then we're tearing down our resource. If we go ahead and just run this as it is with pytest-sv, go ahead and see, look, we can see that before it ran any of the tests, it set up the resource, ran all of the tests, and then tore down the resource. If we change this to, let's say, function, we will see this for each test. We take a look at this output, we can see it set up, pass the test, tear down. Set up, pass the test, tear down. Same thing for each test. Another interesting parameter you can use for the fixture is the params. And this allows you to pass a list of different values that you can use for your tests. And this is kind of combining the parameterize with the fixture. So if you use this fixture inside a test, it'll run the same test with these different values passed in. So for example, we're setting up a browser, let's say like Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. It'll set it up, pass it in as a value, and then tear it down. And to access the values that are here in the params, you do have to pass the request fixture. And then you can get these params by then doing request.param for the current parameter in the fixture cycle. So in this test1 file, I have this test a function. I'm passing in that browser fixture. We'll go ahead and run pytest-sv, and we'll take a look at this output. And we can see right here, it ran the test a 3 different times with the different values that were passed as the params argument on our function. This allows different variety of testing as well. And that's it. Another interesting thing about fixtures is they can actually be used by other fixtures. So in this case, I have 2 fixtures here, fixture 1 and fixture 2. They both have the function scope. Fixture 2 is using fixture 1, and we have Autouse set to true. That way we can see it in action. So let's go ahead and run it with pytest-sv. We'll take a look at this output. Since this is a function scoped fixture, we can see that for each function, it sets up fixture 1, then sets up fixture 2, then tears down fixture 2 and tears down fixture 1. And it does that for each test, since that is the layering we have here. If we did try to use something else like a session scope with a function scope, it will then throw us an error saying that they have different scopes, and we cannot do that as a scope mismatch. But if we were to use a function scope and then have a scope that's not as frequent as a function scope, so something like a session, a class, a module, a package, being used by a function scope, then it will run the test and work fine. There's a little bit more to fixtures, but that's basically the meat of what you need to know. If you found this helpful, leave a thumbs up, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.